There's a moment when you realize that someone you once trusted completely no longer feels safe to be around. And the strange part, you don't feel angry about it. You just feel tired. Tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. So quietly, slowly, you begin to step back. You stop picking up the phone as fast. You stop explaining yourself. And then one day, the door closes. Not with a slam, just a soft, deliberate click. And somehow, you breathe easier. If you've ever been there, or if you're standing at that door right now, this channel exists for you. Not to tell you what to do, but to help you understand what's already happening inside you. If that kind of clarity matters to you, subscribe. You belong here. Let's start at the beginning. Not your beginning with that person, your beginning before them. Most people who eventually cut someone off were not always this way. They were the ones who showed up, the ones who answered calls at midnight, the ones who sat with other people's pain for hours and walked home carrying it themselves. They were, in many ways, extraordinary in how much they gave. But there's something no one tells you about giving that much of yourself. It accumulates. Not loudly, not all at once. It builds quietly, like water rising in a room. And by the time you notice, you're already exhausted. There's a scientist named Dr. Stephen Porges who spent decades studying how the human nervous system responds to chronic stress. His research, known as the Polyvagal Theory, revealed something important about how our bodies protect us when we've been overwhelmed for too long. He discovered that when the nervous system is pushed past a certain point, it doesn't just trigger anxiety or fight. It does something quieter. It shuts down. It retreats. It conserves energy. Porges called this the dorsal vagal response, but in plain language, it means this. Your body, at some level, makes the decision that it has been giving too much for too long to people who haven't been safe. This shutdown is not weakness. It is not cruelty. It is your nervous system doing its oldest job, keeping you alive. So when you start to pull back from someone and feel relief instead of guilt, your body is telling you something real, something worth listening to. Now here is where it gets deeper. A psychologist named Murray Bowen spent years studying how families pass patterns across generations. One of the ideas he developed was called emotional cutoff. He noticed that some people, when faced with overwhelming closeness or unpredictable relationships, instinctively create distance as a way to survive the emotional weight. And here is the compassionate truth beneath that behavior. It often starts very early. When someone grows up in an environment where closeness was unpredictable, where love sometimes felt warm and other times felt unsafe, they learned something profound about relationships. They learned that intimacy carries risk. They learned that the closer you let someone in, the more exposed you become. This is not a character flaw. It is a lesson the mind learned to protect you during a time when you had no other tools. So what this creates over time is a kind of emotional vigilance, a background awareness, a quiet radar that is always scanning. Most people never understand this about themselves. They just know they feel things about people before they can explain why. They know when something is off before they have evidence. They know when a relationship is costing them more than it returns. That awareness was built by experience, and it is more sophisticated than most people realize. This is the part where most conversations about this topic get it wrong. There's a difference between building a wall and drawing a boundary. A wall says, no one gets in because I don't trust myself to survive them. A boundary says, I know what I can hold and I know what I cannot, and I choose accordingly. One comes from fear. The other comes from clarity. Cutting someone off is not automatically one or the other. The signal that tells you which one it is how you feel afterward. If you cut someone off and feel hollow, ashamed, or like something is missing, that might be worth sitting with. But if you create distance from someone and feel a quiet sense of peace returning to your body, if the air feels lighter, if you sleep better, if your thoughts slow down, that is not isolation. That is your system coming back online. Standing firm in that decision, without explaining yourself 20 times, without performing guilt you don't actually feel, that is not coldness. That is a person who has finally chosen themselves with intention. There's research worth knowing about here. Studies in the journal Nature Neuroscience and separate work done through the University of Iowa have explored what happens in the brains of people who experienced early emotional stress. What they found is that this kind of experience doesn't just wound people. In some cases, it sharpens them. The brain areas connected to reading social situations, detecting subtle shifts in tone, tracking the emotional undercurrents of a room. These areas show increased activity in people who had to pay close attention early in life simply to feel safe. In plain terms, the people who learned early that not everyone can be trusted often develop an unusually accurate ability to read others. They notice when someone's words and behavior don't align. They sense the slight withdrawal before it becomes obvious. They recognize patterns in relationships before most people would even think to look. This is not paranoia. This is a form of social intelligence, shaped by experience, refined over time. So when someone with this kind of processing decides to step away from a relationship, it is rarely impulsive. It is usually the conclusion of a long, careful, quiet observation. They have seen what they needed to see, and they have made a considered choice. Something needs to be named clearly here because it changes everything. Loneliness is the ache of wanting connection and not having it. It is an absence you did not choose. Solitude is something different. Solitude is the feeling of being in your own presence and finding it enough. It is chosen. It is quiet. It is not empty. It is full, just full of something different. Many people who have cut others off and stepped back from busy social lives are not lonely. They are in solitude. And for them, that solitude feels like the first real rest they have had in years. The silence is not a wound. The silence is a place where they can finally hear themselves think, where they are not managing anyone else's emotions, where they are not performing, where they simply exist without cost. This is not something to fix. This is something to understand. Harvard conducted a study on human happiness that ran for 75 years. 75 years! Following hundreds of people across their entire lives. And the conclusion, when all of the data was gathered, was this. It is not the number of relationships that determines how well a person lives. It is the quality of them, the depth, the safety, the reliability. One relationship where you can be fully yourself is worth more to your health and your peace than a dozen relationships where you must constantly manage how you are perceived. This is not a small finding. This is one of the longest studies on human well-being ever conducted, and it says exactly what some of you have quietly known for years but were afraid to believe. You do not need to fill a room. You need to find the right few people. And in the meantime, protecting the quiet, protecting your energy, choosing not to let certain people back into your inner world, that is not a flaw in your character. It is a quietly fierce act of self-preservation. There is nothing wrong with a person who has simply learned what they can carry and has chosen to carry it carefully. You are not broken for needing peace. You are not cold for protecting it. You are not isolated for choosing it. You are someone who has paid close enough attention to their own life to know what it needs. And that kind of self-awareness, calm, grounded, deliberate, that is one of the rarest things a person can develop. Hold it. Don't let anyone talk you out of it. The right people will understand, and the ones who don't, well, you already know what to do.